Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. So it's been a year since George Tavares and I ran for mayor of Mississauga in a by-election that took place June 10th of 2025. So it's been a year since that election, and so I thought it'd be good to check in with George. How you doing? What you been doing? What do you think of what's going on in
I've been
Mississauga?
busy.
Et cetera, et cetera. So George, how are you? What you been doing?
I've been busy. It was great. It was a great experience for me. I had a couple of really interesting ideas, some of which I pitched to council. Even though, of course, I wasn't mayor, I still thought it was a good idea to pitch some of them, and
Yep.
they've accepted them. And then I had a couple of cities outside of Mississauga. So I had some Edmonton, Calgary, Victoria, BC reached out, asked me about some of my ideas and whether or not they could work in their city. So I did a quick talk about that for them. It was a great experience for me. So some of my ideas may not have ended well for Mississauga, but it seems to have moved a couple of different locations in Canada. So I'm
Excellent.
pleased
So
with
tell
that.
me about some of those ideas.
So the bike and bus for free initiative was my favorite one. So the idea was that if you were, riding your bike and you wanted to take the bus, as long as you had a bike alongside of you, you were free to take the bus for free. And the idea behind that was I went to a few meetings with the cycling community, and one of them had an e-bike that was probably worth $3,000 or $4,000, and it broke down on him, and he was terrified. So he had to chain it up against a tree, and he said he had to take a cab, and then he had to get his truck, and then he had to go pick up the bike. And I said, wouldn't it have been great if it was a bike and bus free, where you could just put it on the bike rack, and you can bike for free. And he thought, geez, we should really make that happen. And that's how it started. So that was my favorite one, where I thought that was a good idea. The other ones were the timing. I'm not sure if you remember this. I mentioned that the bus transit system and our transit management system, sorry, our traffic management system, they should be working in conjunction with each other. So the buses have transponders, and it can time the lights so that it would seem like a virtual BRT rather than the buses being the slow poke out of the entire, because it
Yep.
slows down the traffic.
Big
So I
time.
thought make it the thing that actually generates faster transit, faster transit traffic. Um, and that kind of took off. So Edmonton reached out to me and asked me if that was a real possibility, and I managed to get a peek at their system. But yeah, it could absolutely work along with Victoria and Calgary. So yeah, those are my three things that I
Congratulations.
really enjoyed.
So you and I
Thank you.
ran for mayor. We didn't win,
We
neither of
did.
us. Was it a good experience or a bad experience?
I would look at it for a couple of different things. I had the very first time I ran, I had 4,800 voters that reached out to me, and then there was another 900 at the last election. So I lost a few votes, but I believe that those votes were them asking me to be a voice for them. So I still take that very seriously. So I thought that was a positive experience. But outside of that, I was a little disappointed about the whole way it was structured. I thought that they gave an unfair advantage to people that didn't need an advantage. I think that they chose people for debates incorrectly. I think they chose them. Some locations chose them just kind of on the first five or six people that logged in and stayed, and they forgot that there were people last minute entries, such as yourself, that were really excellent candidates that didn't get a chance to speak to certain communities because of it. So I thought that that was a really unfair advantage that they were given to some of us. And then, of course, we had some newscasters that invited only the people that were in council and neglected to have anybody else, a third party, nonpartisan, a person with an outside voice, completely forgot about us, and they went ahead with it as though it was nothing. So I kind of found that really unfair.
Yeah, I thought it was very ironic that the groups that excluded people were the ratepayers organizations, Marinette and others, that really are about giving voice to non-council people, that excluded attendance to just the council members, and or if it wasn't just the council members and one or two more, and even one council member. They said they had a limit. I think it was six people on stage, and one person didn't show. Well, they didn't invite anyone else up on stage, so obviously their limit wasn't the reason. They just wanted to limit, and there were some really good people that were running for mayor that deserved an opportunity. And by having four incumbents running, they had an unfair advantage. They had a lot of support. They had money. They had publicity. They had name awareness. And I think that, it comes back to the old line about if you don't change changing the deck chairs on the Titanic, you're not going to change where the Titanic's going. And I worried that that's what ended up happening. So what do you think has happened in the past year? What's your sense of, are you happy with what's happened in the past year, or are you dissatisfied?
Well, so we've had three elections. So we've had the federal level election, same party that was elected 8 years ago, same party that's currently in. Okay. Then we had a provincial election, same party that was in, 7 years ago, same party that was elected in. And let's face it, we had a municipal election and we had the same people, same groups of people that were running. We elected the same people. They're the same people in. I'm really disappointed. If they really wanted change, and if they demanded change or they want change, they certainly didn't vote for change. Ultimately they voted for the exact same. And it's ironic. I live in a condo, small condo, and I take the elevator ride, and there's a person that I went down the elevator with the other day, and he looked at me and he said, when I look at our current mayor and our current council, I'm always reminded of the lyrics from a particular song that said, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And I thought that was ironic because it's a song from Won't Be Fooled Again. And of course, we were fooled again. So I'm not quite sure that lyric was particularly helpful.
So I got to ask you about two issues. We'll probably talk some more, but I got to ask you about two. So the budget went up by something over 8% this year. On the campaign stage last year, one of the current councillors that ran for mayor, didn't win, came in second, said that he was going to hold budgetary expenditures to zero.
Yes.
And then another one who came in third said that they were going to hold it to the rate of inflation. Rate of inflation, right, I think, is less than 3%. And we went up by over 8%. What do you think about that?
So I don't want to pick, we're not going to say names, but the one that said that they were going to freeze taxes, they said it was they were costed, it's all up online. And I thought it was interesting because the person that had written it all up and did all the costing and everything like that were the same people that were working with the City of Toronto mayor, where they were in a financial pickle for the past 3 years where they needed the Ontario government to bail them out. So I have to question whether or not those numbers were legit. That was the first part. So I didn't think that was an accurate statement. Everyone else said that they were going to keep it the cost of inflation, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, but the cost of inflation. The truth is they're blaming now the Peel Region Police Force.
Well, no, let's come to police, because that's even without the police. We'll come back to police in a second. That's my second question.
No, I agree. But I just wanted to point out that they're now blaming the Peel Region as being the major cause of it.
No, but it's not. The Mississauga budget went up by over 8%, completely separate from Region of Peel, Board of Education, and Peel Police. So Mississauga itself, and it's been up by over 8% for something like 5 or more years in a row. Is that sustainable?
But the reason why I keep bringing this up is there was a lovely pamphlet inside of our tax bill, and it listed the reasons why. And the first thing that was on there was Peel Region Police budget. That was their primary reason. And I'll be honest with you. I don't like looking at the excuses. I want to see results. And the problem that they keep saying is that they pay in 65% of the budget, or they're required to pay in for 65% of the budget, but they only give about 50% or less than 50% of the vote. I'm saying that if they really cared, they should have petitioned for the Ontario government to either have the strong mayor's power to have the ability to oversee or to kibosh the Peel Region budget to make it more manageable for the city of Mississauga, or ask for 2 additional votes so that they can actually have some power to say we're not voting in favor of this. But people have forgotten that 3 councillors in the city of Mississauga voted in favor of this budget increase, which of course was a landslide, and it just kind of landslided into the city of Mississauga's budget or tax increase. So I'm not sure how that all played out, but if the city of Mississauga councillors were all on board with the idea of keeping the rate of inflation or better for for the taxes. They certainly didn't do it on their end.
Well, and I want to, as I said, I want to come back to Peel Police, and we're going to do that after a break because I think that is a whole separate and very important issue. But just on Mississauga expenses alone, and the Mississauga portion of the taxes, that's up by over 8%, and it's been up over 8% for more than 5 years in a row. I'm trying to get statistics going back even farther, and they're very difficult. They make it very difficult to actually go out and get the statistics. But they keep on explaining it away in a very disingenuous manner by underrepresenting the tax increases. And so I think part of it is when you don't recognize and understand your own tax increases and your own expenditure increases, then you got a real problem in making the solutions. But I am very disappointed that we haven't seen, and I wasn't sure whether they'd actually be able to achieve inflation, but to have almost the same increase as the prior year when you've got 4 of them run for mayor, 1 of them become mayor. They wanted to talk about so many changes from the past to actually have an increase that's almost approximately the same as the past. If they had come in at 5 or 6 rather than over 8, I would have said at least they gave it a college try. But I was disappointed with that. Anyway, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back in 2 minutes with George Tavares and talk a little bit about Peel Regional Police because I think that's a huge issue. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. This is fun for me because I got George Tavares. We spent way too much time together a year ago on campaign stage after, debate stage, all candidates meetings, different, opportunities. And you were a pleasure to get to know. And I loved your humor and I loved your policies. And I thought you were a great guy. I was disappointed you didn't get more opportunities to speak because I think that Mississauga would be better. Even if you didn't win, Mississauga would be better today if you had had more opportunities to speak. I got to ask you, though, about Peel Police. Yeah. Peel Police budget was up over 23%. And you're adding something like 300 uniformed officers. And I guess I got 2, maybe more than 2, but 2 real issues with that. Number one, 23% is an astronomical increase. If the OPP or the RCMP went up by 23%, people would go nuts. And it would be the front page of the newspaper. And it didn't seem to have, cracked through sort of the public consciousness. And, crime has gotten worse in Peel. There's no question about it. And carjackings are up and home invasions are up. And we've heard about guns in Port Credit and domestic violence they talk about as being one of the biggest, increases. And so if they needed a 23% increase, I got to really question who was minding the store a year ago that didn't fund the police to the extent it should have been. And allowed crime to escalate to this level that you needed a 23% increase. Like, we didn't grow our population by 23%. So I think that either people are wrong today for allowing a 23% increase, or probably worse, maybe what we're incurring now is what we needed. And it's the people that were governing the police force and the police services board for the last couple of years that allowed crime to escalate so dramatically that the chief of police comes to the services board and says, I need a 23% increase. And he gets a majority of council to vote in favor because we got a crime wave. Like, what's going on? Who's running the show?
Yep. That's a great question. And I don't think we're ever going to get an answer for it. But there is 2 things that we have to point out. One is that the police budget is a black hole. We can't get a line by line item of what they're going to use it for. They can be they can be cavalier. They can be nice about it. They can say, "Oh, 300. We're going to put 300 uniformed officers." That doesn't come up with that budget number. That's a huge budget number.
Massive.
So there's a few things that we need to point out. One of them was that our current mayor basically said, "No, I don't want to do this," and asked at one point in time if they can keep it down to 17% of. I think it was 17 million that she'd asked, something a little bit lower. And they voted, no, we don't want to do that. I think it was a 23, then it was 17. Somebody came up with something like 18. And this is a regional council. And they all said, no, we're going to give the police board what they want, even though it's a black hole. We can't identify what it is that they're going to be spending it on. And we can't guarantee that they're not going to ask for another 23, 27 million next year. So I brought this up at our last election, and I said that what we should be considering is a performance-based budget increase. So if crime does go down, you get an increase by X amount. If crime goes down by a little bit more, you get a little bit more each time. It's been used in the U.S. Just outside of the burbs of Chicago. That's what they did in order to get rid of certain types of crime, and it worked extremely well. The police force kind of put their pants on, said, let's make this happen, and they absolutely crushed it. So they did a great job. And this is going back a few years, but I think it has merit. I think it has an ability to create change. And I know that the police board would not love this idea, but if you did it a bit different, so if you took that money and you put it in escrow, you just held it somewhere, and then you said, drop the crime by X and we'll give you that kind of money, then there's an opportunity for them because the money's there. Guaranteed, you got the money. Now it's a matter of performance-based, and you can get your money, but you have to make good on your promise. Because let's face it, if crime continues to go up, you can justifiably say, I need more money and I need more law enforcement and I need more, tools to fight crime. Because if you start lowering crime, somebody would say, well, why am I paying you this $27 million if crime's already dropping? Let's cut the budget. So there's a weird discrepancy there. There's no justification for giving that much money because crime is going up and it continues to go up. But if you were to give that money and the crime drops down, then are you justified to say, no, I'm not going to give you any more money? You fulfilled your obligations. So there's a real problem. And counselors don't want to be part of that because they know if they say no to a law enforcement officer increase or a law budget increase, that would pretty much be a death rattle for them. And they don't want to do that.
So I'm not sure if I agree with you. I think that, if crime goes up, we got to try to stop it, and we're going to have to spend some more money to stop it. And so I think that giving some incentives to the police services board and the police department to decrease crime, I think is smart. And so if you can figure out a way to do that, maybe your suggestion is a good way to do that. But I do think that we've had a crime wave in Peel. We have, and I think that the fact that they want to put, and I think the number is 300 new officers, uniformed officers, I think makes sense. But, if it's gone up, our crime, I was personally burglarized twice in 9 months. It's astounding. And I was at a community meeting in Mississauga recently, and crime was the number one issue, and home invasions were the number one issue. Burglaries were the number one issue. Carjackings, supposedly in Brampton, are the highest in Canada. And insurance rates for cars because of that are high. So I think that we got to think about a couple of things. So domestic violence is supposedly, I'm not an expert on this, but has increased and is one of the number one concerns of the police board, and one of the biggest increases such that they need people to address it. And small time burglaries, carjackings are, and I'm told that one of the biggest negatives is economic situations. If people don't have jobs, if they're having difficulty making ends meet, it's easier to turn to a life of crime, or it's felt easier to turn to a life of crime. And domestic violence goes up when you lose your job, when you don't have economic opportunities, when affordability has gone down. And I wonder, with youth unemployment above 15%. And unemployment among new immigrants at very high levels, and a lot of students, foreign students, living in basement apartments and things like that. Have we done the right things from a societal economic development standpoint to make sure people have got economic opportunities and can afford to live? I'm told that a lot of the carjackings are done by people that are brought in from outside the country. They steal a couple of cars and then they're gone in a couple of months, or the burglaries are done by these gangs. Have we let in too many immigrants? Have we let in too many people on temporary foreign workers? And I think the answer to both of those is yes, and we're capping that and we're trying to restrict it. But you got to wonder about what we've done from an economic standpoint, the way we run our city, that have allowed this crime to increase so dramatically. And I wonder if our council are spending enough time thinking about economic opportunities, about unemployment levels for young people, unemployment levels for new immigrants, integration into society, and domestic violence. I think that's it's a disease almost in our community if it is at the levels that people are suggesting, and you got to figure out why that's happening and address it. And yes, policing is one way, but there's got to be other ways to create economic opportunities such that people don't have the economic pressures that they have that leads to, hopefully not everyone, but some of the people that, do inappropriate things.
So I'm going to argue with you because I honestly think
I love arguing with you.
I don't believe that that's accurate. I honest to God think that remember there was a phrase, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Considering the time that they spend in imprisonment is usually just a couple of hours.
Bail reform, no question. And then you got to have a deterrence. And so having, judicial reform, prison for reform, there's no question. I agree with that.
Absolutely. So
this guy that killed the family on the 401 or whatever it was, he was out on multiple bails.
Yep. Agreed. So remember, it's called the criminal justice system, not the victim justice system. So this is on a federal level. Things need to change. So the council should be petitioned. Should absolutely be. But
why is it so worse? All of this. Why is it so worse in Peel? Like everything you're saying is true, but why Peel so much worse than the rest of the GTA?
I'm having a real hard time because I don't want to say it out loud, and I don't think council wants to say it out loud. And I'm certain that the police force don't want to say it out loud. But I think there are some multiple gang and crime elements, some organized crime elements that they don't want to say out loud because that invokes fear in the neighborhoods, and nobody wants that. But here's the real question: once you identify what the problem is, and let's say it is organized crime, and we need to fix it. We need a task force to make this stuff happen. And then that task force, it needs to pick the top three things, correct those top three things, then move to the next three. So once you manage to whittle it away. Now, again, I can say that in the comfort of my own home. I'm not a member of the law enforcement office. I'm not a member of the law enforcement, so I can say all this stuff. But remember earlier when I said that the police budget was a black hole. No data comes out. Things go in, nothing comes out. I can't ask. Neither can council. They can't ask, well, how much money do you have in your task force for guns and gangs? Can't tell you. Not going to. Well, how much do you have that for domestic abuse? Not going to tell you. Don't have to. Right? So there's a real problem with that. So unless we actually have open dialogue, once the black hole gets opened up and we're allowed to actually see their documents and see their task force and see what they're planning on doing, this will be a constant argument with our city. It's not going to get better in Peel until we start having an honest and difficult conversation with our police force.
Well, I think that the fact that the Police Services Board and the police department thought it had a need for a 23% increase, and people in the community know that crime has gone up, I think says that we've done something wrong in the last couple of years because we've underfunded and we've created this situation that has allowed it to escalate dramatically. And so therefore we've got to look back at the mistakes that were made and hold those people to account, those people that were in charge of the Police Services Board, those people at the top echelons of the police force. And maybe they're doing the right things to catch up today, but then the mayor and others are disagreeing. So, I don't know, either we've increased too much or we didn't increase enough in the past. One or both have got to be, right. But we got to figure out what the answer is. And then I think the second thing is, and I've said this lots of times and lots of people have said this, the best deterrent to crime is eyes on the street. And I don't think we're as strong a community today as we have been in the past, such that, people don't, a generation ago, you'd feel comfortable leaving your door unlocked. And I don't think that's the case today. And I wonder why and what we've done wrong, such that we've got a community that isn't as cohesive, that doesn't have the social capital, doesn't have the need to protect your neighbor. And neighborhood watches are good, and the appeal safety, whatever it's called, the safety board that helps people, Crime Stoppers, is good.
Yeah.
But we need something more to bring together our community such that we stop this crime. And I do think that a third thing is economic development. I think our unemployment level is too high. And youth unemployment can't be at 15%. New immigrant unemployment can't be above 20%, and expect people to just hang around. They're going to do bad things, regrettably, and we need to make sure that we've got economic opportunities. And then affordability. If you can't afford your groceries, if you can't afford your home, if you're living in a basement, it all puts pressures. And I think that as a society, we need to address all of those things, not just putting more police on the street. We do need more police on the street, but not just that. And then, frankly, domestic violence. It can't and shouldn't be thought of as acceptable. And we need a way of educating people, whether it's adults telling their kids, schools, cultural institutions, religious institutions, making sure that people understand that domestic violence is just wrong. And to think that is one of the areas that the police services say they needed dramatic increases in personnel to address. It's a travesty that in our society today, domestic violence is such an issue that police have to ramp up spending so dramatically and officers so dramatically to address it. Anyway, that's my soapbox on crime. Have you got another answer for crime?
No, I'm going to leave it right there. I think you nailed it. I think you did well. That's great.
Okay, we're going to take a break and come back with another issue in just 2 minutes with George Tavares. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got George Tavares, candidate for mayor in the mayoralty by-election in June of 2025, a year ago, and the prior election 2 years previous. I won't ask you if you're going to run again, George, but I hope you do. Anyway, tax increases. Everyone got their tax bills for this year, and people were astounded at the increases. What do you think is going to happen? What are you hearing on the street? What are you hearing from your friends and neighbors?
So my friends and neighbors, and if you look at a couple of your big Facebook and all the other social medias, it created a big brouhaha, and now they're all saying that they want to storm the city council meetings. They want to go in there. They want to demand things to change. Now they're saying they're going to have a petition put together, and this was over at a few of the different social media platforms. And I'm kind of giggling because I'm thinking, guys, it's a little too late. You could have done this a year ago when you had 20 people running for mayor, each one of us with a different idea, and you brought in the same people, you got the same results. You can't continue to do this. I will be there to watch and witness this. I will be there in person to enjoy this, but I am curious to know what exactly they're planning on changing, because they could have made we have an election next year. We have an election next year in 2026. I'm curious if they're still going to be as angry as they are today.
Well, part of the problem is, City of Toronto went up by 9%, and it was front page news, and people got really upset. I hope that you see that level of attention to, and disappointment isn't strong enough word. It's almost disgust. It's like, we're talking about trying to, get the budget under control federally. Trump brought in Elon Musk and Doge, and I'm not suggesting that, but certainly a lot of attention in the United States. Are we paying enough attention to waste, to bureaucracy, to red tape, to duplication in Mississauga and Peel? I understand that some of the people, it was in the paper this weekend that the mayor, and I've heard it at a community meeting, were blaming the way that the Peel Police Services Board is allocated between Brampton and Mississauga, and they wanted to be based on population, not based on market value of homes, on assessment effectively. Well, you know what? I think that's, we've got this progressive income tax system federally that says that the rich should pay more. We have a system of property taxes that said the wealthy should pay more. You pay based on the market value assessment of your homes. Why all of a sudden are we going to go to a user fee? And how police can be a user fee done on population is beyond me. So I think that, it's an argument, and it would be an argument that would benefit me and you as Mississauga taxpayers, but it's certainly not progressive. It's regressive. And you think about if you ever allocated it to parts of a city, which would really make no sense, then it would be the areas that maybe the most populous and poorest would have the biggest police budgets, which doesn't make sense. And so I think that the argument that is being made that it should be allocated on population versus market value assessment, which is what property taxes have already been based on, I think is a silly argument. But most importantly, I really worry that we don't have people that have got business experience, economic experience involved. And, one of the big things that I think a lot of people talked about in the federal election and also in the provincial election is that if you had just a bunch of lawyers and career politicians in charge, then it was sort of status quo and you divvy up the pie. And we've now got a banker/economist as our prime minister. We've got a guy that was a big senior investment banker as our minister of natural resources. Certainly our premier was talking about his business experience and touting that. I think we need people that are not career politicians that have got some business and or economic or banking experience. Maybe not all of them, but maybe one or two would be helpful to actually think about how to set a budget and how to cut expenses.
So I agree with you, and I love it, because that's kind of where my bread and butter came in. When things
You're an
go
efficiency
terribly
expert,
wrong,
aren't you?
So when things go terribly wrong, I'm the guy that they call in to ask me to go to these different projects and identify where the gaps are, where we're losing money, where we're hemorrhaging money, and how we can stop it. And I was very good at it. I enjoy it. It's one of my favorite things to do. I know I can be a bit of a pain for some of the people, and I've had it a few times where some of the CEOs and the big shots and the big wigs, watching the second guy, this absolute unknown coming in from another country to tell them what they're doing wrong. Boy, they find it insulting. So there's a way to juggle it so that you slow walk them to their own epiphany, and then they create their own. They have their aha moment and they fix it. That was my superpower, was giving them the opportunity to figure it out for themselves, and then they implement it. Because once you get that buy-in, boy, they're in. Because then they're going to look smart. I'm not so sure that we've got that kind of leadership inside of our council. I don't think we have it in the region of Peel. I think that we should absolutely have somebody going in there. There's two things about our budget that upsets me. Years ago, we would have two reports for the budget. One was an executive report, and one was a full budget. And the full budget was 400, 500 pages. The executive report was like 20. And it was, wonderful pie charts and everything. But if you really wanted the numbers, if you wanted to crunch the numbers and take a look, they had everything in there, including costing codes that they use in SAP. And I'll tell you the reason why I know it's SAP is I've worked with SAP for so many years. I can spot that the naming convention from a mile away, and it would tell you what all of the what the codes were, would tell you what project was allocated to, and you can work backwards. And it was great because you can see where the money was going, where the money was coming from. They've dropped it. They only give us an executive report, one report given to all of us, including council, I would think, including council. And so now I can't have the opportunity to go through line by line item, which is one of my favorite things to do because I'm a weirdo, go through line by line and identify the gaps and then say, wait, you've done this twice. And we're not supposed to pay anything for the LRT. We're not supposed to pay a penny into the LRT until it's ours. Until it's been transferred over. Ownership's been transferred over to Mississauga. We're paying into the LRT in certain things. There was a UPS thing about $1.2 million or $1.3 million. There was a few things in there that I thought was a bit suspicious, and I brought it up to some of our council members, and they brought it up to the council, and then they had somebody bring it up and just say, "Oh yeah, that was," and then they kind of brushed it off. I thought, that's infrastructure. That does not belong to us. We shouldn't have to pay that out of pocket. So if they're doing that in 2 or 3 locations before, when it was visible, what are they hiding now?
Well, you talk about your experience working either in other cities in Canada or internationally. I think part of it is that we've got this attitude in the electorate that having someone that's been on council for 10 or 20 years is beneficial, or having someone that's lived their whole life in Mississauga is beneficial. I actually think it's beneficial to have people that have been in other sectors of society,
Yep.
that have had other experiences, that have lived and worked in other cities, that have got experiences from elsewhere, so they can bring best practices, learnings, some ideas from other places. We become very insular and myopic if all we want to do is hire as our leaders on council people that have always been politicians and have only been living in Mississauga.
Yep, and I agree. And there's a real misunderstanding because they become products of their environment. I think at the very beginning, when they first come in, first 1 or 2 years, they're full of themselves. They really want to do better. They want to do well for their community, their city. Some are about, I don't know, year 3, maybe even 4. They start becoming a little bit more complacent. They start realizing, if I just follow these rules, my life gets a little bit easier. And then I think that's when they fall into the system, and then they're done, right? They're no longer. And then those that are career politicians inside of municipalities, when they become career politicians, we're done for. We never get any type of new ideas. We don't come up with. And don't get me wrong, these are really great people. I know some of the members of council. I love them to death. I think they're really good people. But sometimes they're lacking when they're talking about real world experience, because they're reflecting on stuff when they were elected 8, 12, 16 years ago. And the world's changed significantly from when that happened. And I think we need new blood. And I did mention it before. We should have term limits. Maybe 2 was too much. Maybe 2 was too little. Maybe 3 was too much. But somewhere in between there. Like I'm not quite sure how to put it, but I think term limits are really important for our cities and our municipalities, because you get new blood in, you get new ideas, and they have a general idea of what's wrong with the city, because they're boots on the ground people, and they need to know, they have a better understanding of what's wrong, and they can reflect what the people are actually calling for.
I think term limits are a good idea. I've got developments in Dallas, and I spend time in Dallas, and Dallas has term limits for not only mayor but council members, and also for state Senate positions. Yep. And what it does is it's sort of, up or out. You got to perform and do well, such that you get a more senior level of government position, or you're out. And I think that's healthy. And it's a way of making sure people do a good job, and that you also always have new blood coming in, and that you don't have too many career politicians that are there for a long time. I do want to turn though to something that I think that the mayor particularly has done well, which is she convened this mayor's task force on development, and had a whole bunch of developers in to get some advice from people that know what's going on about what was going on, particularly given that right now, it looks like we've got a sort of a seizure in our building segment of our industry right now, and nothing's happening. And one of the things that came forward was a split in half, a 50% reduction in development fees. And I think that makes a ton of sense. Frankly, I would have taken it down even farther. And Prime Minister Carney is suggesting that now, for the whole nation is a smart thing to do. What do you think about what we're trying to do from a development fees and otherwise in housing?
So I love the idea of removing some of the development fees, because we're stuck now. We're in a really weird position where we don't have a choice. That's the first point. The second point that I thought was interesting was they moved away, some of the developments that are going on in Mississauga. They moved away from condos, and they're going to purpose-built rentals. And there was a few things that popped up that I thought was really important. One of them was the GST, the removal of GST for purpose-built rentals. That was a federal level thing that was happening. I thought that was a brilliant idea. So a lot of developers have moved over to that. The second reason why that was a good idea for developers to move into purpose-built rentals is that they don't need to get the financing that you need. So if memory, you're going to have to correct me, I think, but you needed something like 90% of the condos sold. If you were to build a condo today, and you were to build it 20 stories or something like that, in order to get funding from the bank, the developers needed to sell at least 80% or 90%.
That'd be 75%. But yeah, you're right.
Somewhere out there. So this foregoes that, and they can start building almost immediately, and they get funding, which I thought was a really
no,
great
that's
idea.
not true. So that you've got to have a market study that suggests to CMHC or other people that you can support this level of rent and that level of demand, and then you go to CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing, and you can get now 75% financing. It used to be 95%, so they've dramatically reduced the amount of financing that you can get. And so, I think that the move to purpose-built rental is a market move. It's not something that government has done, but government is trying to make it a little easier with some of the movement that you made in regards to reducing the GST and reducing development fees. I think it is also going to, it's going to be a real challenge. We're probably going to have the year of the lowest building starts in a long, long time. And I think that what it's going to do, if we don't have a reduction in housing prices, it's gonna make our affordability problem even more problematic in the future, because we're just not going to be building. We're reducing supply when we should be increasing supply. And I think the answer there is red tape and regulation. Stats Canada, CMHC, Build have all done reports and say that Canada is one of the slowest places in the G7 in making approvals for housing, and Toronto, Mississauga, Vancouver, Victoria are some of the slowest municipalities in actually making approval, where it takes 2 to 3 times as long to review a zoning application as it does to actually build a building. Makes no sense that the pushing the paper takes longer than it does to actually construct the building. And I don't think we've had the attention on reducing red tape and regulation that we need to have.
So I think you nailed it, and I think you did point. We have to give kudos to our current mayor, because she did put together a task force for housing, which I thought was great. I think my very favorite person on that task force was Andrew W. I don't want to say his last name, but Andrew W. works for the city of Mississauga in the planning development. He is a brilliant, brilliant man, and he has some great ideas of how to reduce red tape. If you get a chance to sit down and talk with him, just bend his ear for a couple of minutes or so. You'll be the better for it. He's got some great ideas.
Connect me up with him.
Sorry?
Connect me up with him. That would be awesome.
Will do. But he was an amazing, and every time I emailed him a question about the city of Mississauga, he was really quick just a lovely man, quick to answer, no fluff, just flat out, this is the problem. Here's how we can resolve it. I'm petitioning to get this done.
And I'm not suggesting the people in the planning department are bad. I think they're doing the job that they're asked to do. But when you've got 24 different reports that you got to prepare, and those have got to be reviewed, it takes a long time. And it's almost as if the development people have as an orientation, we want to stop development. We want to have a huge impact on development. You think about the economic development department. The economic development department wants to attract business to Mississauga. And I wonder whether the building planning department should become more like an economic development department and have as an objective to grow economic development like the economic development department does, rather than a restrict development. So it's a change in orientation. It's a change in objective, because good people will do what they're told to do, and we just got to give them the right objectives, the right mission. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments with George Tavares in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We got George Tavares with me today. George has got a long business career, primarily in efficiency management, international, across Canada. And he's now run twice for mayor of Mississauga, most recently a year ago in the Mayoralty by-election. Didn't win, regrettably, but really argued his points of view with humor and articulately from the stage. And so, George, I really commend you for running and appreciate you. And so thank you for putting your name forward and working hard in that regard. I got to ask you a question. Am I pronouncing your name right? Because given hockey, I got to make sure I pronounce your Tavares name right.
Tavares is fine.
What do you think of the Maple Leafs?
Oh, good Lord. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
So, you and I had this conversation a year ago. I did an interview with Bob McCowan, the sports commentator, and he said that, when you've got a failure in the first round or the second round, you got to change house. You can't just go with the same people. And he said that a year ago, and I said that from the stage, and we didn't make changes. Now we're making one change at the top, but so far it doesn't appear to be changing the players. Are we making the right moves? Do we have to go through a rebuild if we've got any hope of winning the Stanley Cup?
So are you asking as a municipality, or are you asking about the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Both, obviously. That's why I'm asking you the question.
So I will say this. Because the mayor is a product of the environment of council, I didn't think you were going to get much of a change. You brought it up before, you said it before, changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. I said stop planting seeds in the desert and expecting things to grow. Yeah, there needs to be change, but the we that you're referring to, I'm assuming, is the king's we, not you and I. It's the people that need to vote. And unfortunately, when you only have 21 to 25% of the population that could vote,
they didn't care.
Vote,
people don't care.
It's really hard to vote. So you have to question whether or not. Originally, I thought it was the Faulkner law. Are you familiar with it? The Faulkner law is if you can't make a decision, it's a psychological theory that if you can't make a decision, don't make one, and a decision will be made for you by the masses. And the idea behind it, and I think that's one of the reasons why people decided, I'm not going to vote. I'll let other people do it, and then I'll just ride the wave. So that's the first one. The second one is, and I'm not quite sure I really believe it, but maybe they understand that the municipality doesn't have a lot of power. It goes, federal has some power, but the real strong powers that exist is the provincial powers. So those that you elect, your MPPs, your premiers, they're the people that actually have the power to make Mississauga do the things that Mississauga is supposed to do. And that's why when they came up with Bill 212 and they told Toronto, you got to get rid of those bike lanes. And Mississauga saying, well, what about our bike lanes? Well, you're going to have to report whether or not you should have those bike lanes. All of a sudden, there are little children asking their parents, can I have bike lanes? So maybe the people are a lot smarter than I gave them credit for. And they're saying, well, we're not going to vote in the municipality. Maybe we're not going to vote in the municipalities because it's pointless. We'll vote in the provincial election because it has more substance. And maybe that's the reason why. I don't know which one it is. I'd hate to believe that that's the real reason. But neither one of them are pretty good. But here's to answer your question about the Toronto Maple Leafs. I honestly believe we know that Mitch Marner and John Tavares will not be playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mitch Marner's probably going to go off to someplace like Colorado, where he'll be an amazing an individual there. And John Tavares, as much as it's going to kill most of the people, he'll probably go to Montreal Canadiens. And here's the thing. For the first time in my life, the only time in my life, I might consider buying a Montreal Canadiens jersey with my last name on the back of it.
Sounds good. George Tavares, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And seriously, thank you very much for putting your name forward twice to run for mayor. I'm not going to ask you now because it's inappropriate this far ahead of time, but I hope you remain open to run a third time because I think that you add real value to the communication. And you know, it's not one of these things where you got to win to have an impact. I think that by getting up there on your soapbox and on the debate stage and making some points, I think you do influence people over time. I think that's what's got to happen if we're going to improve our city. And so I think that it's a cumulative effect of all the residents' organizations, of all the people that get involved, all the supporters, all the campaign workers, and the candidates and the victors that end up changing things. And so power to you, buddy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure being on a stage with you. You were a lot of fun. I really appreciate what you have done. Some of your ideas, I've already stolen them. So I'm sorry if I decide to run in the next election with some of your ideas.
Take them all. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at saga960am.ca. It's Saga, but it's Mississauga, it's Brampton, it's Peel, it's Western Toronto. And if you can interested, you can get all my podcasts and videos on my website, briancrombie.com, on YouTube, on social media, and on podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Good night, everybody. George, let's have a drink and pour credit sometime. Good night.
Absolutely.